Hello there. Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, are we seeing the end of Pax Americana as Trump sides with Russia over European allies, or is it all just part of the deal?
And what is going on with Elon Musk's email? There are mixed messages, to say the least, for federal workers asked to justify their jobs. But first,
this week marked 3 years since Russia invaded neighbouring Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin declaring war early this morning, moments before the first explosions were heard in Kyiv and other major Ukrainian cities.
And back in February 2022, President Joe Biden wasn't mincing his words.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war.
3 years later, and much has changed. A new American president is blaming Ukraine for being invaded and talking about the Ukrainian leader this way.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
President Trump's comments stunned many observers last week, although he did sort of walk back some of that on Fox News Radio. Sort of.
And just so you know, when you say Russia was the attacker, yes, Russia was attacked. Russia attacked, but there was no reason for them to attack. You could have talked him out. There was no reason that he should have attacked. That whole thing was going on for years. There was no reason he was going in. It should have never happened. That war should have never happened.
sorry to jump in, but I've just got to say, there are a million reasons why Ukraine can't have elections right now. Firstly, the Ukrainian constitution doesn't allow you to hold national elections during a period of martial law. Also, constant air raids make organisation and vote counting kind of impossible, not to mention juicy targets for drone attacks. Also, voters in the eastern occupied areas of Ukraine, they'd be disenfranchised by any election that you held right now. Also, there is no system in place at the moment for absentee voting. Also, even the opposition doesn't want an election held until at least 6 months has passed after the lifting of martial law. So I'm sure that notorious democracy enthusiast Vladimir Putin will be very disappointed to hear that, but there are loads of good reasons to not hold the Ukrainian election right now other than being a dictator.
Yes, but as for who started the war, a procession of senior Trump officials this week have been tying themselves in knots, trying to avoid stating the undeniable fact that Russia started the war by invading Ukraine. Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth wasn't giving Shannon Bream a straight answer on Fox News Sunday.
Fair to say Russia attacked unprovoked into Ukraine 3 years ago tomorrow.
Fair to say it's a very complicated situation.
Okay, we'll leave it there.
I don't know, Shannon, maybe you shouldn't just leave something like that there. Maria Bartiromo didn't fare much better with National Security Advisor Michael Waltz.
Can you acknowledge that Russia is the aggressor here?
Well, you know what? Who would you rather having go toe-to-toe with the likes of Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi, or anyone else? Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
Okay, so the old answer the question you don't want to answer with another question routine. And he filibustered on and on for another minute or so until Maria got her chance to pin him down. Maria.
Well, look, let me move on to the conflict on Israel.
And then there was this from businessman Steve Witkoff. Technically Trump's Middle East envoy, but for some reason it remains unclear right now, a central player in the Ukraine conflict as well. First, he tried to duck the whole question of who started it.
The war, irrespective of who started it, needs to end.
Okay, but Witkoff followed that up with a classic bit of victim blaming.
The war didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians. There were all kinds of conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The president has spoken about this. That didn't need to happen.
Curious logic, Steve. Ukraine provoked Russia into invading Ukraine by wanting to join the NATO alliance after Russia had already invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea, which had been a part of Ukraine since its independence from the old Soviet Union in 1991. Meanwhile, President Zelensky has again called for direct talks with Trump. Looks like that'll happen later this week. And he made a very undictator-like offer.
Якщо мир для України, якщо вам дуже потрібно, щоб я залишив свій пост, я готовий. Друга історія, можу поміняти це на НАТО. Якщо є такі умови одразу, щоб довго про це не говорити.
It's fair to say Ukraine's European allies have been rather unsettled by Trump's erratic diplomatic week. The incoming Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, saying that it is now his absolute priority to strengthen Europe to achieve independence from the US. And Merz continued, after the latest statements made by Donald Trump last week, it is clear that the Americans, at any case these Americans, this administration, mostly don't care about the fate of Europe one way or another. We may be witnessing a sudden end to the post-World War II Pax Americana, which gave Europe one of its longest periods of peace and prosperity. Ultimately, it seems, Chaz, the American taxpayers just got sick of footing the bill.
Yeah, look, those were strong words from Merz, but ironically, Trump would probably welcome those words. He wants Europe to arm up. So there you go. There is still a lot of uncertainty, though, about what's about to happen, starting with that minerals agreement that Trump is trying to get Zelensky to sign. He's been trying for a week. First, we heard how America wanted 50% of all economic value coming out of Ukrainian resources, including their ports and their infrastructure, amounting to a higher share of Ukrainian GDP than the reparations imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. But then we heard a very different take from Marco Rubio.
We had a conversation with President Zelensky, the Vice President and I, the three of us. And we discussed this issue about the mineral rights. And we explained to them, look, we want to be in a joint venture with you, not because we're trying to steal from your country, but because we think that's actually a security guarantee. If we're your partner in an important economic endeavor, we get to get paid back some of the money the taxpayers have given, close to $200 billion. And it also, now we have a vested interest in the security of Ukraine. And he said, sure, we want to do this deal. It makes all the sense in the world. The only thing is I need to run it through my legislative process. They have to approve it. I read 2 days later that Zelensky's out there saying, I rejected the deal. I told him, no way, that we're not doing that. Well, that's not what happened in that meeting.
Well, that sounds different. And then we heard that Trump was playing hardball by raising the possibility of cutting Ukraine's access to Elon Musk's Starlink satellite internet system. Ukraine was supposedly told it faced imminent shut-off from the internet if it didn't sign that minerals deal. Now, that would be pretty scummy. But is it true? Because Zelensky still wouldn't play ball. He said he wouldn't sign something that would be paid by 10 generations of Ukrainians. And yet the Ukrainian internet stayed on. And also, Zelensky became more popular, with him registering 63% approval now in the latest Ukrainian poll, which is, to be clear, more than 4%. And then yesterday we heard that they struck a wonderful deal where Ukraine would contribute 50% of the proceeds from future mineral resources, yes, but not to America. It would go to an investment fund for projects in Ukraine. America would have a stake in that fund, yes, but how much of a stake would be determined some other time. And the US would also back Ukraine's economic development going forward as well. So, what was really happening behind the scenes all that time, John? It's hard to know, but if there isn't yet another twist, then they do seem to have landed somewhere quite reasonable in the end.
We'll see, we'll see. This week, something quite extraordinary happened at the United Nations, and it was very big news, especially in Europe.
America's changing stance on the war in Ukraine has been highlighted at the United Nations, where its UN envoy voted twice alongside Russia.
The US and France were at odds at the UN Security Council, where the US failed to back a resolution labeling Russia as the aggressor in Ukraine's war.
After that, the US ambassador to the UN then put forward another resolution.
The time for Russia and Ukraine to make difficult choices and end the fighting is now. We call on all other UN member states to join the United States in pushing for a durable peace that will bring stability to Europe and deter further aggression.
But then the US voted against its own resolution after France amended it to make it clear that Russia was the aggressor. What to make of all of that? For more, we're joined by the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Russia, Ukraine and Eurasia, Evelyn Farkas. Evelyn, welcome to Planet America. First of all, how significant a geopolitical shift do you think we're witnessing now between the United States and Europe? And how important was the US siding with Russia and North Korea against Ukraine at the UN?
Yeah, John, I think we're all very shaken here and hoping that it's not a permanent shift. But the reality is that the President of the United States instructed our diplomatic corps to vote with the autocratic states, with Russia against Ukraine. So at the moment, it does indeed look like President Trump, is trying to realign the United States, unless, of course, it's some kind of diplomatic play, and he's not appreciating the impact of course, a diplomatic play, because it's not just posturing to other people. To other people, it looks like a serious realignment.
Dr. Farkas, there's been so much anger about Trump's false narratives about Ukraine and Russia, but do we need to just calm down a bit and wait to see the results? Because this could all be just a negotiation tactic. Or is it important to keep Trump on track by holding him responsible for the false things he says?
Well, I think you're leading the witness with your question, because I think while President Trump's diplomacy sometimes can bring results because he can be, I don't know if threatening is the right word, but he can throw people off balance. He can throw other leaders off balance. He can sort of come out of left field and make certain demands, like he did in the context of the war in Gaza. There, I think President Trump's intervention with all the deadlines and the angry talk actually did result in something positive. We saw a lot of hostages get released, right? So that was and of course, Palestinians were able to go back to their homes, or at least where their homes were. And so we see that sometimes it works, but other times, especially when you're dealing with long-term allies and arrangements, security arrangements where we're dealing directly with the autocrats. So the Gaza example is very different from when you're talking about how to deal with an aggressive autocratic government like Russia that is waging a hot war against Ukraine and frankly against Europe and the international order. So there, I think, I would exercise more caution if I were the president in terms of what types of language I would use and how I would align myself, because here we're talking about the morale of our partners, the morale of the Ukrainians, and also, frankly, the moral issues that are at stake and our values. So if it's posturing, I don't consider it wise. If it's something more than posturing, then it's incredibly dangerous and devastating to me as an American.
Defenders of Trump's diplomatic style would say he gets results. Europe is paying more for their own defence, and he is getting a peace process underway. Ultimately, this is what he was elected to do.
Well, it leaves out the fact that he's also emboldened Vladimir Putin by adopting his rhetoric, by essentially saying that he'll make a peace deal and hinting that he wants it quickly and potentially at the expense of Ukraine, certainly at the economic expense of Ukraine, because we see this deal to try to claw back, funding that we provided to Ukraine as a gift in the past. So that's dangerous. And of course, it's also what you're leaving out is the impact on China. And let's not forget, China and Russia are inextricably right now completely and for the foreseeable future connected with one another. As long as Vladimir Putin is in the Kremlin, certainly, and as long as you have the Communist Party in control in China, those two countries are working together, cooperating, and the reality is that if Vladimir Putin is emboldened, then President Xi is emboldened to take action against China, Japan, the Philippines, other allies and interests that the United States has in the Pacific.
Turning to the new minerals deal, it seems fairer than the original version, but in your opinion, have we landed in a reasonable place with that deal?
Look, I don't think we should be asking the Ukrainians for any of their sovereign wealth right now. First of all, because when we gave them assistance in the past, it was done of our own free will, and we did not set it up as some kind of a loan. And second, ransoming Ukraine's future is also not wise. And if the Ukrainians want to, to be fair to them, they are sovereign, they are in control of their country. And so I don't like an approach where we are calling on them to lay down their, to mortgage their future. Instead, what I would prefer is that we unfreeze the Russian assets, $300 billion that the Europeans can unfreeze and should have unfrozen a long time ago before we got to this point. Those assets can be used to purchase defense weaponry from the United States and other countries, and also to start the rebuilding and ultimately to finish the rebuilding, because there's a lot of money, of Ukraine.
Dr Evelyn Farkas, thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Now, as we told you, Donald Trump has been trying very hard lately to rewrite the history of the Ukraine war, leading to criticism from all over the world.
Making these statements where Ukraine started the war is absolute rubbish. I don't know what he thinks he's playing at, Trump, but he may want to go and do a bloody history lesson this morning.
Strong words. But instead of getting a history lesson, maybe Trump should be giving a history lesson.
You don't know history unless you've seen History Rewritten by Donald Trump, with all of the world's great conflicts reimagined by your favorite president. World War I.
Franz Ferdinand was a very unattractive and modestly successful archduke.
World War II.
I would have told Hitler, don't go in. You better not go in, and he would have understood.
With Pearl Harbor.
Hawaii should have never started it. I think Biden was responsible.
And the Battle of Britain.
Churchill was a dictator. He was a dictator.
All the way back to David and Goliath.
I hate to say it, but David was polling at 4% approval. Tops.
Don't just get educated, get re-educated. With History Rewritten.
He should have called it the Gulf of Germany. I think everyone could have gotten behind that.
Well, it all began with a tweet on Saturday from Elon Musk. Consistent with President Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they got done last week. Then came the kicker. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. And if that wasn't enough to ruin their Saturday afternoon, 2 hours later, the email arrived.
The email sent Saturday by the Office of Personnel Management instructs workers to send 5 bullet points detailing their previous week's accomplishments.
But then a funny thing happened. Some members of the Trump administration pushed back.
FBI Director Kash Patel ordering his workforce to pause any responses to the email, and leaders at the State Department and elsewhere saying no employee is obligated to report their activities outside of their department chain of command.
Well, I'm glad that the cabinet stood up to Elon Musk, because he just can't be threatening federal workers like that. The Federal Workers Protection Board is very clear that a retirement or resignation needs to be voluntary, and that can only happen if the employee makes an informed choice. A non-response to an email, especially an email with a deadline of just 1 business day, does not evidence a choice. So that email there was a false alarm. No one was getting sacked. In fact, Musk maintained he was being misunderstood. He said the reason the email mattered was that a significant number of people who are supposed to be working for the government aren't even checking their email. He believes they might be using non-existent people's identities or the identities of dead people to collect paychecks. And so the passing grade for his test was literally just, can you send an email with words that make any sense at all? It's a low bar, he said, not about sackings. Okay, maybe so. But according to a court filing from the administration last week, Musk is just a senior advisor to the president with no greater authority than any other senior White House advisor. He simply doesn't have the authority to go around terrorizing the entire federal workforce like this whenever he gets the urge. But you know who does have the authority to do that? Trump does. Which is why this answer on Monday suddenly freaked everyone out again.
So I think it was actually, there was a lot of genius in sending it. We're trying to find out if people are working.
Uh-oh, especially given the Wall Street Journal reports that Trump and Musk did speak on the phone about Musk's email before it went out. So Trump approved of the email and maybe people were getting sacked. And this was the day of the deadline. But then, a few hours later again, the Office of Personnel Management, who incidentally sent the original email, decided that employee responses to the OPM email is voluntary. Also, a non-response to the email does not equate to a resignation. Okay, so that's finally settled. The email was indeed a false alarm and no one was getting sacked. Except just before the deadline, Elon Musk tweeted, Subject to the discretion of the president, they will be given another chance. Failure to respond a second time will result in termination. What the is going on here? This is a shambles.
Well, despite the controversy, Musk was getting a rock star's welcome at the CPAC Conservative Conference in Maryland. I think he's doing fine. And then Elon got a gift from the president of Argentina, Javier Milei.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
A chainsaw. Not exactly showing deep compassion for the dedicated public servants he is trying to make unemployed. Nor indeed was this.
I mean, we're trying to get good things done, but also have a good time doing it, and and have like a sense of humor,
No, not really. And some Republicans are even getting a little uncomfortable with Elon Musk's brand of humour, if not his objectives.
If I could say one thing to Elon Musk, it's like, please put a dose of compassion in this. These are real people. These are real lives. These are mortgages. It's a false narrative to say we have to cut and you have to be cruel to do it as well. We can do both.
So he wants a chainsaw of compassion?
No, I won't hear of it. We can all have a great time, John, constantly threatening to sack people. Elon's party like it's 1899 attitude especially clangs, given at the same time as he was dancing around with that chainsaw, his ex-partner Grimes was begging Musk on Twitter to please respond about our child's medical crisis. She said, "I am sorry to do this publicly, but it is no longer acceptable to ignore this situation. This requires immediate attention." And she said she was doing it because Musk wouldn't respond to texts, calls or emails and has skipped every meeting, and she was worried their child might face lifelong impairment if he didn't respond soon. None of this is a great look. And that takes me back to what I was saying before about how Musk is turning this administration into a shambles. You see, Trump's numbers are currently on the slide.
Take a look at Trump's net approval rating. CNN, you see it on this side of the screen, -5. Gallup, -6. Ipsos, -7. Quinnipiac, -4. Negative, 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 underwater, 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 underwater.
Okay, you made your point, Harry. But if Trump is looking for someone to blame, and he usually is, then there is one obvious candidate, and that is Elon Musk. The Washington Post poll found only 34% of Americans approve of the way Musk is handling his job, to 49% who disapprove. The CNN poll found only 28% of Americans say Musk having such a prominent role in the administration is a good thing, with 54% saying it's a bad thing. And the Quinnipiac polls found 55% of registered voters say Musk has too much power, with 36% saying he has the right amount of power. And it's only been 1 month of Doge, John. There's still 17 to go.
Are there really? 17? Well, among the sackings this week, 2 members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They're the top military brass who advise the president and key cabinet members. So let's play a little guessing game.
One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong.
So, which ones do you think Donald Trump just fired? Well, no prizes for guessing. Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the first woman to command the US Navy, she's out.
Now look very carefully, because one of these things just doesn't belong here.
And who else? Very good. The chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown. And in case you're wondering, could this possibly be a part of Trump's war on diversity, equity and inclusion? Here could be a little bit of a clue. Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth questioned Brown's appointment in his book last year, The War on Warriors, asking if Brown was made Joint Chief because of his skin colour or his skill. We'll never know, but always doubt.
Well, maybe Hegseth should then ask Trump if he has all his doubts, because Trump was the one that appointed C.Q. Brown to be Air Force Chief of Staff in 2020. Or maybe Trump was being woke back then. I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, there's a lot of it going around. I'd blame Mike Pence. Meanwhile, President Trump was ready to go with old CQ's replacement.
I am nominating Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Raisin Kane to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
And he had this little dig too.
General Kane was passed over for promotion by sleepy Joe Biden, but not anymore.
It's important to point out this is an unusual appointment. Raisin Kane is a retired three-star general credited with helping defeat ISIS. That all sounds very impressive, but every chair of the Joint Chiefs since the 1940s has been a four-star general or admiral. In fact, by law, the chair must have served as vice chair, overseen a military service or combatant command, none of which Raisin Kane has done. But don't worry about him failing to meet the legal job requirement. It can be waived by the president.
It can be waived, but we should note that there were actually 7 senior officers whose jobs were in peril that day, not 2. These 7 here. As you can see, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, they were sacked. So was the Vice Chief of the Air Force. Also, these 3 JAGs are in trouble as well. They're the military's chief legal officers. And actually, it's the JAGs that the Army veteran and ex-Democratic House member Jason Crow wants to draw attention to. He said purging the JAG officers actually worried him the most because they interpret law for the commanders, and replacing those military lawyers with Trump loyalists could be very dangerous. As for Raisin Kane, yes, Trump will need to waive the legal requirements for him, which is very unusual, but it's not a massive problem in itself. I mean, they had to do the same for Colin Powell back in the day. He worked out fine. And it's not like this guy's a lightweight. The bigger concern could be why Trump rates Kane so highly. This is what Trump said last year.
And this is where I met General Raisin Kane. And what's your name? General, what's your name? And he gave me his name. What's your name, Sergeant? Yes, sir, and I love you, sir. I think you're great, sir. I'll kill for you, sir. Then he puts on a Make America Great Again hat. I said, you're not supposed to do that, you know that. They said, it's okay, sir, we don't care.
Now, if that story actually happened, that would be completely disqualifying, but it does sound kind of unlikely, doesn't it? And Kane's friend insists that Kane doesn't own a MAGA hat and has never put one on. Personally, I'll be giving him the benefit of the doubt, but that is always the concern with these Trump favourites. Are they simply yes men? You just don't know until it really matters. Oh, one more thing, John. Back to Musk for a second. We're always talking about Musk. I know he does a lot of nutty stuff, yes. But I just want to point out that the theory of Doge, that the federal government needs an audit, that's an absolutely legit theory. Every now and then you see some strong evidence for it as well. I just want to squeeze this in from this week. We heard about a $2 billion grant for a fledgling non-profit linked to Georgia Democrat candidate Stacey Abrams. This is a $2 billion green energy grant awarded in April 2024 to an organisation founded just a few months earlier in late 2023. And they'd reported just $100 in total revenue over its first 3 months in operation. So $2 billion is quite the upgrade from $100. And I think it's fair to say that that grant could raise ethics questions about how Biden's EPA selected recipients for their grants and whether they might have been playing favourites. Now, that is the kind of decision that should be examined closely, in my view, but while Elon Musk is sending out sociopathic emails and cavorting around with his ridiculous chainsaw, he is seriously undermining any chance of something good coming out of Doge, which is a shame, because I reckon America could do with a Doge that's for real, but I just don't think they have it.
You should send Elon an email or something. And that is all the time we have for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you back here at the same time next week or anytime you like from 9 p.m. on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And don't forget Planet America's Weekend Edition, Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Summer Time on ABC News, also on iView and online. See you there.
Bye.